Now we're going to take a broader view of Sportec with Jacques Darigaud. Jacques is the president of the French Sportec with his 200 companies. Not many of them worked on the games, so how can we go further in incorporating innovation into major international sports events? How can the Sportec sector be developed? That's what you're going to tell us now in the next 10 minutes. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, Gail. Thank you. Delighted to be here with you all. I've seen you sitting there in the room, and we have this leaflet, which I imagine you have read since you arrived in the room. So we can't say that we have to do 30 minutes of sport each day and then sit there without moving. So you need to stand up, and we're going to use our hands because an event like this represents a lot of work. A lot of people are involved in the organization. With Marie Jaillant, GL Events, so all present in the room who often are behind the scenes and we can't see on the stage. So for all the people who have set up this event, I think we should use our hands and give them a big round of applause. And as I am here in a strategic position just before lunch, we're also going to stretch our arms a bit. Perfect. Now you can sit down. That's your 30 seconds of sport before I start my presentation on Sportec. So what I want to tell you is the story of Arthur, who I met yesterday evening for the first time, who's 23 years old, and who has finished his studies and finds himself at university studying IT, computer science at university in Toulouse, but it's not really what he wants to do. He's a bit bored. Is it because he got the wrong careers guidance, or did he make the wrong choice? But he regrets not having chosen the school of Xavier Niel, where young people today can discover entrepreneurship and innovation. One day he's looking at a video on the internet, a video that goes viral with two people in a football stadium who are close to each other, probably two friends or a father and son, one of whom has a visual impairment, who can't watch the match. Naturally, the person next to them, rather than just leaving them in this difficult situation, draws the movements of the ball on the person's hand, which means that the person who can't see has this tactile way of tracking the match. And Arthur, who is in computer science and who spends too much time in front of screens, thinks he can perhaps do something here and decides to create a tablet. As not everybody might think to draw things on their neighbour's hand, and creates a company which is called Touch to See. Touch to See is now a company based in Toulouse with 10 staff, with a few €100,000 turnover when they've just been selling their product for a few months. And one of the partners, the company is one of the partners of the Olympic Games in 16 venues with a physical tablet on which the ball moves for football, for basketball, for rugby, and when there is a goal, the tablet vibrates, and the person who is visually impaired has an audio description of what's going on the pitch or caught in their ear through an earpiece. So I won't go through all 200. I won't describe all 200 companies who are part of the Sportec group, but they're all companies with this sort of individual story, people with a passion, with an idea which they inspired by a video they saw on internet, sometimes to fill the gap. There's also Footbar with Sylvain, who had the idea, Footbar, who was studying engineering and was in Silicon Valley, and he wondered why it was that in the US, how come all the sports are so connected, but football here doesn't benefit from the same connection, the same data. And so each of these people in their respective companies has their story to tell. This inner strength is Manon from Second Relais, based in Nice, who wonders how come there are so many types of sports equipment we can't reuse, that get thrown away. We throw away shoes that could perhaps be refurbished, reused, and there might be people who might be interested in using the sports equipment that has been used. So there's all sorts of ideas like this. And we decided we need to bring together these different forces in a collective group to defend this innovation and impact. Because if we consider that sport is a commodity, we're not going to progress. It's not enough to believe that with athletics, sports or rowing clubs, we're going to be necessarily able to inspire young people to take up these sports. We were very lucky with the Paris Olympic Games. There is a considerable impact there. In the report provided by the Olympic Committee, there were 57 innovations, not all very visible. Some innovations in the changing rooms, and of the 57 innovations at the Olympic Games, there's been the use of 3D in all the spaces where events were organized to work on security. Then there's the visible part of the innovation for the experience of the view of the spectators in the stadiums, with virtual reality, all sorts of different enhancements. So what this means for us in Sportech is that there were 17 sport tech companies involved in the Olympic Games out of a total of 200 companies. I don't know if that's good or bad, but as we are competitive, we want to go much further. We want it to be 200 next time. We want all the companies to be involved in the big events because we cover all the different areas of sport, mainly the fan experience, which I'll talk about at the end. But as I was talking about touch to see and virtual reality, there's Immersive, for example, headed by Emmanuel, who's a great entrepreneur who does more turnover abroad than in France. So sometimes it's easier to start our activity abroad with the NBA or others. Then there is amateur sports. We were proud to establish ties with the Ministry for Sport and the National Cause of Sports for All. We put together a project with them to finance 3 innovative startups which can make young people and not so young people to do sports. I think you may have seen the figures in the report yesterday. There's a group. Apparently France ranks 119th out of 146 in terms of the amount of sports activities our young people do. And when I think that we're bringing up young people in a country that ranks 119th out of 146 for sports activities among those aged 11 to 17, more than 70% of young people don't do the minimal physical activity defined by the WHO. And can we change that figure? Can we accept that figure? We really need to be aware of this through the whole ecosystem. Because even if there are 200 of our companies, we are startups, we are fragile. And as Barbara said earlier, because we're in a world of innovation, which requires research and development, which requires money invested over several years to test the solutions before the finished product can be launched, whether it's a connected sensor, concussion analysis, or enhanced pictures with natural grass to save tons and tons of liters of water with new concepts, which mean we don't need to water the grass in the same way on golf courses, in stadiums, or on race courses, if you can imagine the saving that represents. These are all companies which are part of our Sport Tech collective, which spent years patenting innovations, but to finance those innovations you need money, and that is why these companies are called startups. By definition, they imply risk. Venture capital, that's precisely what it means. We're investing, taking a risk, which isn't the same as if we put 1,000 euros in our savings passbook. Even with 100 euros or 1,000 euros, we can contribute to crowdfunding of this type of company. A lot of companies work with this sort of system, which is increasingly popular, and all these investments and all the institutions in the room here need to mobilize to finance innovation, because once again, we cannot settle for organizing exceptional Olympic Games which showed the beauty and the skill of all the French athletes who won all those medals, or the Paralympic Games. There was a lot of sports success. We can't just stop there. So what are the solutions? Aside from saying that we still have quite some way to go, the solutions are to work with the institutions on a day-to-day basis. So what we've done now for almost a year is we signed a contract last year with the Ministry for Sport and with the Secretary of State for Digital Affairs and with the Public Investment Bank, the BPI, which created an accelerator for sport tech activities. It's a sort of an accelerator, is a sort of MBA for 20 companies which will receive guidance from top-level people from the top business schools like HEC and from different backgrounds. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you don't know how to do everything. When an engineer starts a business, they may have the technical or scientific knowledge, but it might be more difficult to find a light funder. But to see how we find the other skills that we need, whether it be sales skills, financial know-how, legal know-how, etc. So we need to provide support for the people creating these companies, and that's what we're doing with the BPI, the Public Investment Bank. Then, as we said, we need funds, we need cash. If we take a practical example, we have a big industrial company in France, Decathlon, a retail company, which in July launched a specific fund called Decathlon. They do mergers and acquisitions, and they have a startup studio. So this is an exceptional initiative, provided that they really support the startups in their development with financing. And there's also the support that can come from the 1,000 Decathlon stores around the world. And then we have the banks and the investment funds. There are more and more investment funds which, among other things, invest in sports. Sport has often been considered in France as something more marginal. We don't do enough sport at school. Sports teachers in schools were often considered perhaps not the most important teacher. When you go to French universities or schools, there are no sports requirements, no sports papers to enter the business schools or universities in France, except for École Polytechnique. How come in the US there can be incredible grants or bursaries for good sports people, young players of American football or basketball players? We could draw inspiration, for example, from our Australian friends who came to see us 18 months ago and saying, it's incredible, you're hosting the games. What is the recipe for this? But in fact, sport tech in Australia, that's 750 companies. They're 4 times bigger than us. That's 11% of the investment in startups in the country, bigger than the fintech sector. So this is really a strategic shift that we have to make with the 10 entrepreneur and staff in the room here. If we want to change things, we need to go and see the institutions. We had an appointment at the Presidential Palace yesterday with some advisors. We went to see the new Minister for Digital Affairs recently. So we're hoping really to change things before the next elections, because obviously it can be difficult towards the end of a term of office. We're also working with the INSEP training centres. We have a consortium in generative AI with 5 sport tech companies working as part of France 2030 for the reindustrialization of the country, but we generally forget that there's sport. So perhaps sport also needs to be included in the big investment programs for the future, along with the health sector and others. It's not acceptable when sport represents 2.8% of GDP in France that sport shouldn't be included as one of the focus areas for economic development. So I'm not going to talk about more of the magnificent products from our 200 companies in our group, but I do suggest that you take a look at the sporttechfr.com website, where there are innovative solutions which are available. Yesterday at the Presidential Palace, things were said about how come they weren't familiar with our companies, how come they didn't know our companies. And it's not complicated to organize events, to bring people together from the private sector, public sector, universities, and to put things together, not when the Olympics arrive next in 2030, but now in 2025. We want to be part of the different programs to prepare for the 2030 Olympic Games, which can be even more innovative, because perhaps we can change those figures, those poor figures on the sports activities of our young people. And perhaps we can improve those figures even before the 2030 Olympic Games. And it's not because we currently rank 7th for fundraising in the world that we're going to settle for that. We want to be in the top 5 or the top 3 in the world in terms of fundraising to boost innovation, because ultimately what we want is to see as many people as possible doing sport, and I'm sure everybody in the room here wants the same thing. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.